problem with work is nobody knows how much everyone else is getting paid.
I'm a software engineer.
How much do you make?
191K.
I am currently a release train engineer.
How much do you make in your role?
I make $145,000.
I'm a travel nurse. Last year I made $150,000 and this year I should hit $240,000.
I'm a dog groomer. I'm going to make about $90,000 this year.
$90,000?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you feel well compensated?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had no idea you could make this much being a dog groomer, so.
Yeah, me either.
That was Hannah Williams, creator of the TikTok sensation Salary Transparent Street. She quickly rose to fame in the last 2 years, asking strangers on the street how much money they make. Her channel has more than 1.3 million followers, and she has earned more than $1 million through partnerships with companies like Capital One and Indeed. This is Fast Company's The New Way We Work, where we take listeners on a journey through the changing landscape of our work lives and explain exactly what we need to build the future we want. I'm Fast Company Deputy Editor Kathleen Davis. No matter what your job, you've probably felt at one point or another that you don't make enough. Money is one of the most taboo topics. There is so much emotion and self-worth tied up into how much we make. And all of that plays into keeping us from talking about our salaries, sometimes even with those closest to us. Because money has always been a fraught topic in my family, and because my professional career path has looked so different, I've only ever talked about my salary in general terms with my family and friends. And I'm not alone. In a recent survey, only about half of the people said that they share their salary with their family members, while just 32% said that they share their pay details with their close friends. But we can't change what we don't talk about, and keeping mum about salary is what keeps gender, racial, and executive to worker pay gaps thriving. The less we talk about our salaries, the less we know our worth, and the less likely we are to be paid fairly. Luckily, the tide has been slowly turning in the last few years. More companies have adopted at least partial salary transparency policies, and some states and cities have even introduced salary transparency, or at least salary range, laws. But we have a long way to go. So to help me figure out how to get there is the TikToker you heard from at the top of the show, Hannah Williams. She has a knack for getting people to talk about money. Hannah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so let's start with how you got here. What was your relationship with money growing up? Is it something you talked about with your parents, your friends? Do you know how much your parents made growing up?
I actually barely had an understanding of money growing up. My parents didn't really talk about it, but it wasn't that they weren't transparent. Like, they were having conversations in front of me and my sister at the kitchen table, about which car they were going to buy and the reasons for that. But I remember my first introduction really with understanding money, aside from having a weekly allowance, which was, not much more than getting a couple things at the store every once in a while. Candy, not like anything fancy, was when I went to college and I had to take out student loans. And, it became, to me, everybody I knew had student loans. It was kind of the thing you had to do to go to college, regardless of how much your parents made. A lot of my friends and family took out student loans. And so I didn't think twice about them. I was like, sign me up, give me what I need to go to school. And then when I got my first loan payment, after graduating, or actually I was still in school when I got my first bill because I started paying them off while I was in college. And looking at that number and actually grasping, wow, this is what I've signed up for. I didn't feel like I had a good understanding of what I was signing up for. That feeling of not understanding, and feeling like I was taken advantage of carried me from college through it into my career up to the point where I found out I was underpaid. And I had another realization that, wow, even though I went to a great school, I didn't learn how to negotiate my salary. I didn't know about market research. I was just told, don't rock the boat, don't make your employer angry. And now I'm in a situation where I'm underpaid $25,000.
Oh my God. Same. It's like I have so many feelings and thoughts and can relate to that so well. And I think a lot of people can. That piece that you just said of like, you get a job, you're told to like be a good student, be a good worker, and you accept your salary. Nobody ever teaches you about negotiation, market rate, like any of those things. And I've told this story multiple times and multiple, on this podcast and other places. I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. And when I would get offered, and maybe it sounds like you were in the same boat, when you get offered a salary, I would say, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know you could say anything other than thank you.
Yeah. Like, I accept. Where do I sign?
Yes, exactly. Okay. You offer, like, you have to take it. That's what they offered you.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself in a similar position to you. I found out that a person that I actually managed made more money than me.
I've heard that so many times.
Surprise, surprise, it was a man. Like,
Womp womp, yeah.
yeah, gender pay gap is a real thing. What do you do in that situation? I started looking for another job.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, when you found out you were underpaid, what did you do?
I took to the streets with a microphone, and my poor husband, who I owe so much, I'm so grateful to him for coming along on the journey with me with our iPhones in hand. And I decided to start asking strangers, what do you do for a living and how much do you make? I had solved my situation where I was underpaid. I ended up finding another job months later, but that experience and the lack of transparency in the jobs I applied for after did not resolve even after I found a higher paying job. And so I wanted to do something that I hoped would impact more people than just myself. And I was really inspired by the Great Resignation, which I had somewhat graduated into. I graduated college in 2019. I had a year in the office, cubicle and everything. And then I got sent home when the pandemic hit. And those experiences taught me that there's a lot of collective change needs to happen at an organizational level, but a measly 9-to-5 worker, I don't have the power to demand change from them, but I did see the power of collective action that is gathered on social media, on TikTok primarily. And so I decided, if I can help one person with one video realize that maybe they're not paid what other people are paid in their area, then that's a win for me. And, our videos went viral overnight the day we posted them. I ended up quitting my job 3 weeks later. My husband followed me a month later, and it proved that this is something that workers need and want, and us being able to make a living doing it is just twofold that this is important.
I mean, there's so much in there, and part of why salary transparency is a conversation is because salaries are not transparent, both, by design from companies, but also amongst people. I mentioned it at the top of the show, the amount of people that don't tell their closest friends and family how much they make. There's so much stigma and self-worth and everything tied up into your salary and sharing your salary. Mm-hmm. It's obviously part of a big reason why your videos are so popular is these are not conversations that people are having. Mm-hmm. How do you get people to open up about things that a lot of people don't even tell their family and friends?
How we go about doing this is I have a pitch. I don't just stick a microphone in people's face and ask, how much do you make? I always ask very politely, and we wear our logos, our shirts, to show that we're not just, college students doing this for a school project. And I tell people, hey, we're doing interviews for our channel, Salary Transparency. We ask people what they do for a living and how much they make to promote pay transparency in different roles. Can we interview you? And oftentimes we hear people say their response to that is, oh, I love pay transparency. Like, I helped my colleague make more, or I found out I was underpaid. Like, there's almost always a story that they have. And those interviews always end up being the best because they're people that are very transparent. Of course, we come across people that, have never heard of our channel, don't have an experience with pay transparency. And oftentimes our highest success rate with that group of people is with Gen Z and millennials, younger generations that really expect pay transparency. It's what they expect to see in a job posting. And if it's not there, they won't even bother applying. Other older generations and also, groups of men and there's also race plays into this. We have more success with white people over any other race. There's a lot of different groups and so many factors, cultural, racial, gender, that play into why or why not someone will want to answer the question. We came across someone who was South Asian, and they said, I'm actually really uncomfortable about talking about this, but I think it's important. And she told us that she was like, I'm actually on the way to see my therapist and I'm going to bring it up with her. And she DM'd me later that day and she's like, hey, I'm that girl you saw on the street. I just wanted to let you know I did talk to my therapist, and now we're having conversations about it and deconstructing that. And that has stuck with with me. Like that happened in the first few months of us doing it. And it's one of my favorite stories because I think that a lot of groups, especially cultural groups, place personal value on how much they make. And that's not true. There's some of the most noble and important jobs in our society are not the cleanest, are not the fanciest, plumbers, our garbage men, teachers, people that run our bus system, our metro. However much they make might surprise you, but it also shouldn't determine how we treat or value one another. And I think that bringing up these conversations is the only way to break down those barriers.
I think, in everything you were just saying, a lot of things clicked for me in the type of people that are comfortable and enthusiastic about sharing their salaries and the type of people that are hesitant and the different reasons why people are hesitant. And I wonder, Gen Z and millennial, more white, more male, all of that struck me as they have less to lose. Right. Or if you are a Black woman who fought so hard to get into that room, you have a lot to lose by saying how much you make.
Absolutely.
Not even all of the emotional things that are tied into it. And I have a professional acquaintance of mine who ran Money Diaries at Refinery.
Oh, I know that.
29.
Yeah.
And she wrote in a newsletter recently that she was on the Money Diaries podcast and they were about to share their salaries. It's the entire thing that Money Diaries is about.
Mm-hmm.
And she chickened out because she's like, well, I was applying for another job and I didn't want them to know my rate. And it's like, here she
and
is,
that's
like,
valid.
No, all of her reasons were totally valid. But she's like, and I was the manager of people. Like, do you want your direct reports to know how much you make? But this is a big movement, and you're right that it's coming from these younger generations because they have a lot less to lose. And then that point too about male and white. That's how change gets made, right?
Yeah.
It's so much harder as a underrepresented group to be the change maker. So, that's encouraging at least, but yeah, there's a lot there.
And also, the fact that we have a lot of men answering, and there's a good amount of women also, but like you said, there's the groups that have a lot to lose. I think that it's really great when men are willing to share because they're statistically the highest paid. We should be finding out what the highest paid people are making so that we can bring everybody else up to a fair rate. But I also, I never take it personally when people don't want to share because there are 100% valid reasons for people wanting to keep that secret. That doesn't mean that they'll keep it secret forever. If you are in a negotiation with a company, 100% you don't want them to know how much you're currently making because there's a reason like 22 states have pay secrecy bans. They're going to use that information to lowball you. So the goal is for everyone to make more, and being aware of those scenarios and circumstances where maybe you keep it secret and you should be able to explain why. But what frustrates me about this entire conversation is that the onus and responsibility to pay people ethically should not lie with the employees, it should lie with employers. And them not being transparent is putting employees in these circumstances where they're not able to share their information, or they can risk losing their jobs. That's not right. If we had a transparent system to begin with all around, there wouldn't be infighting or this risk. And so it really demonstrates that corporate America and private institutions in particular utilize pay secrecy to hold power over their employees, and it's wrong.
Oh my God, there's so much in what you just said. And I'm like, let me go back through my mental notes and really kind of drive home a couple of those. Yes, to the power of men sharing those salaries, because then they're the benchmarks, right? Like you're a woman who is an associate editor who is listening to the fact that an assistant editor who's a man makes this much. And you're like, there's my benchmark there. Yep. I know it now. But you're right that the onus, we talk when we talk about pay transparency, and obviously your videos are people talking about their salaries, we usually do tend to focus it on the individuals, but this is not an individual. Like, we did not create this broken system,
right?
It's
not our fault that we're here.
Yeah. We're trying to function within it, but we're kind of trying to finally force the companies. But yes, it's in the company's best interest and always has been for employees not to know what the fair rate is. And the thing that you mentioned, that element that you mentioned about your past salary, there are a lot of laws in place. Kind of that was the first kind of stepping stone of the pay transparency laws, right? Is the ban against asking a job candidate what their current or former salary or what their salary history is, because that just kind of exasperates the problem of being underpaid.
Yeah. And I will add one more thing. I forgot to shout it out, but I also tell people if they're not comfortable sharing their salary in person with me, that's not, showing up on Salary Transparency is not the impact that will have, the greatest outcome. The greatest impact will be had if you talk directly with your colleagues and your coworkers and your friends and family, helping somebody out on a personal, face-to-face business and being able to ask all the follow-up questions and get the information you need and help one another out. That's where the true impact lies. But also there are anonymous salary databases, including our own salarytransparency.com. There's so many that are, they're organized by industry, they're organized by job, they're organized by companies sometimes. Sometimes companies have their own salary databases. Some companies are making the right move in a transparent direction and are sharing that information. So I think we're on the right path, but there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, exactly. And that was what I wanted to ask you about. In watching your videos, I was so surprised by a lot of the salaries on both ends of the pay spectrum. I think I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I think I kind of have an idea of what different industries pay. But I was really surprised on both ends of the spectrum in the types of jobs that sometimes pay well, the types of jobs that, don't pay well, the amount of experience that some people had that, started out. I love how you'll have all the same kind of role, but people with lots of different levels of experience. And it doesn't always line up. It's not like the person with 20 years experience makes more than the person with 1 year experience.
Right.
But what have you been most surprised by in finding those? And are there kind of any trends that you've noticed?
Oftentimes, what surprises me the most are lower paying roles that I have expected to be paid more. And those are, sadly, a lot of the time, they are the most important roles in our society, like teachers, social workers, first responders. A lot of them work long hours as well. They do not work standard 9 to 5s. And they are traditionally, from my interviews across all 50 states, not the most well compensated.
We're wildland firefighters.
How much do y'all make in your role?
56,000 a year.
I'm a PE teacher. I get 59,000 a year.
I taught high school music for 40 years. It was like 60 to 70,000.
And it's a disturbing trend because people that are graduating college right now, college is so expensive that there is a large discussion about whether it's worth it. And if you are going to college, to make sure that you go into a career that has, a good earning potential so that you can pay off your loans.
Yeah, get an MBA instead of an early childhood education degree. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's sad because I think that's going to have a lot of negative repercussions in our society, that young kids and graduating students now are not going to pursue these important roles in our society that we really need them to get into and start changing the guard, because there is going to be a huge shift in generation representation in the workforce. I believe in 3 or 5 years, 30% of the workforce will be Gen Z, and a lot of boomers are going to start retiring. So we need a lot of workers in these important roles. I mentioned earlier that trade jobs are some of the most well compensated I've interviewed. Yeah.
I am a termite inspector. I make about $249 a year.
We ran an article recently about how we need more plumbers,
Yes.
and how Gen Z is not going into the trades, and the trades are actually well paid. I'm
Yep.
just going to make a public plug for plumbers, and also don't usually require a 4-year college degree. There's certifications,
schools.
but not the same. Yeah, but not the same level of student debt and all of that. Yep.
Absolutely. I think that Gen Z hopefully will remove a lot of stigma and stereotypes surrounding some of these roles. They're a really cool generation that's leading a lot of positive change. So I'm hoping that they will see that there's a lot of money to be made in these different roles, a lot of work flexibility as well. I hear great benefits. So I think it's something that if I had children, I would push them towards. And there's so many types of trades. There's the electrical, the mechanical, there's cosmetology. There's so many cosmetics trades. If working on a job site is not your thing, you can get into beauty school, and they all make great money, which is great to see. But then there's also higher paid roles that I see are small business owners in general. Also, like really hustlers, I would say. I've interviewed a water vendor outside the White House who is making great money. I think he said $4,000 a week, which if you've been to the White House, it absolutely makes sense because he's selling about four bottles of water a minute, easy. I also interviewed a hot dog stand owner who got out of jail and he pursued this as like his small business and turned his life around. And it's so inspiring to hear those stories and hear the opportunities that are out there for people.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. You mentioned that younger people are more likely to share their salaries. Do you think Gen Z in overall is having kind of a different approach to talking about money, talking about salary, advocating for themselves, talking about kind of not having that stigma that a lot of us grew up with where you just kind of don't talk about money?
Absolutely. I think Gen Z has witnessed a lot of the trauma that their parents and millennials as a whole generation have gone through, with a ton of economic crises that they've grown up in. And I think ultimately, there's not a change where they're really focused on financial transparency. It's that I think young people don't want to make their parents' mistakes. And, in terms of salary and compensation, they've seen their parents stay in one job their entire lives, but not change much of their earning potential or market rate versus they're experiencing that if you switch jobs, wow, you can make a lot more money. So they're changing this expectation, I believe, for themselves and for corporations as a whole, that they are claiming what's theirs and really trying to survive. Ultimately, I think that they're also seeing that having conversations about money in relationships is very important. We've watched a lot of our parents get divorced. Divorce rates are like 50%, and the leading cause is often finances and money. I think that they're realizing that, wow, these are conversations we should probably be having early on, especially with their friends and family, so that they don't experience the same crises that they've witnessed their family members go through. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. I must say, as a elder millennial, all of the conversations that I have about Gen Z, around labor, around money, around everything is really kind of gives me hope for the future.
Me too.
We mentioned a little bit transparency laws. I think 8 states that have some now, New York, California.
I know it's 15 that have it, and that includes bills that are currently in the works and have been proposed. I believe it's 8 to 12 have actually passed or are like waiting to pass. They'll pass January 1st or June 1st, all of that.
Do you think those laws are the answer? Do they go far enough? What are kind of the other things that we need to do?
I have a hot take that I don't believe they go far enough, but I
agree with your hot take.
Yeah, a lot of people would gawk at that, but I also understand how the legislative process works around here and how politics is really dividing us. And so I take small wins as they come, and I also understand
it's like something better than nothing.
Exactly. And a lot of people have complaints that the laws don't go far enough, but to me, I believe passing some form of legislation is the first step. And if we can get that passed, then that is a win for all workers. And there's a reason that amendments and revisions exist, is that we can add on to them as we go and we see, the data roll in positively, hopefully, from these small changes. We're seeing great results from Colorado that has had this law for a really long time, and they're seeing really positive impacts happening on workers and their work life and their earning potential, but also on companies. Pay transparency is a positive for them. It helps their bottom line and employee morale. I live in Northern Virginia, and I was as involved as I could be in the passage of Virginia's pay transparency bill, SB 370. But just last week, our governor vetoed it, which was really heartbreaking. And I'm upset that I even got involved because I felt the pain of that not happening. But it really is giving me more drive to keep going, because the outpouring of support for this bill shows that there is bipartisan support for legislation like this. And if we can focus on it being something that's a win for all workers instead of a blue or red, left or right argument, I think we can have positive change. But yeah, the fact that a lot of states that have this passed are blue leaning, and the red leaning states that have some of the biggest pay gaps, that have some of the lowest earning potentials in their areas, it's frustrating that they're not hopping on board and seeing that this is a win for their constituents.
Well, and it's interesting too, because the places that put these types of issues to voters, as ballot initiatives do pass because it does have overwhelming kind of public support. As much as we don't talk about our salaries, the other statistic is something around 80% of people believe in salary transparency. And you're 100% right. I don't think these laws go far enough. And we've been covering the shortcomings. New York passed the salary transparency law that includes salary ranges, and a lot of them are wildly, like 40,000 to 250,000, a useless salary range.
Yeah.
It's such a slow, painful road to get where we need to go, but
it's a slow burn for sure. There's so much that can be done. And, not everybody can win either, but I see it as a win for workers. Pay transparency should be normalized. If we can just all get on board with that, a lot of the drama that people are worried about won't be an issue. And hopefully companies realize that, the fear of, oh my gosh, we have to pay people what they're worth will eventually be outweighed by the positive implications that are brought forth by pay transparency. It's also, a lot of companies aren't realizing it's a great PR move.
Well, you're right. What a great recruitment tool to have that out there.
Yeah. And Gen Z is very values and mission driven based. They are not going to apply if you're not sharing the salary because that says something. It's a walking red flag.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and speaking of being transparent, you of course have been very transparent about how much you make from Salary Transparency Street, $1 million in 2023. Congratulations. That's amazing.
I feel like I ran a marathon.
Right? This is astonishing. But and a big part of that comes from brand partnerships, especially with job platforms like Indeed. What do you think the role of job platforms is in salary transparency?
Yeah, job platforms are somewhat the key to the castle, right? Companies are listing their roles on job platforms, which is how they reach the employees. If they are forcing companies to abide by standards that they are being held to in certain states, and, if one state like Colorado requires it, it's easier for platforms like Indeed and Glassdoor to abide by a policy nationwide. And if they require companies to include salary and they recognize that this is a really important effort to close pay gaps and normalize these conversations nationwide, then they can have actual change in requiring companies to make that change. It's one of the steps that I see as a way to influence culture and normalize transparency within organizations as well, as by requiring the job platforms to have those standards in place before companies can list jobs on their platforms. It's a lot of give and take. I can't influence what Indeed and these platforms want to do, but I think it's a really positive move on their part to want to work with a platform like ours and demonstrate that they are committed to this as well. When I was talking to different brands when we first started, we had LinkedIn, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor, and Indeed all in our inbox wanting to partner with us. And the reason we chose to go with Indeed was in the first conversation, they were the only platform that told us pay transparency is so important. It is the future. We want to work with you to normalize that. And I was like, okay, where do I sign? They are really, it's an opportunity for them to have impact on culture of transparency nationwide.
It really feels like kind of the difference between saying you support something and actually supporting it.
Absolutely.
Like, oh yes, we want brand affinity with this versus we are actually going to do the thing.
Yeah, and they've definitely seen an increase. They tell me that there is an increase in pay listing in their job postings as well. So it's nice to see that there is some change happening.
And and to underline the Gen Z aspect again, that's every company, every platform is trying to attract Gen Z users, Gen Z employees. Yeah. And obviously this is a good way in.
Absolutely. It's one of the easiest ways in.
In your Fast Company article, you said that you asked how much your previous employer's budget was for hiring, which was an interesting way to phrase it, a kind of a bold, a brave move and an interesting, way to phrase it. We've been talking about how the onus really should not be on the employee, but, and hopefully, this is a slow moving train, but hopefully that it is moving in that direction. In the meantime, people listening to this most likely have a job or are looking for a job. Aside from those salary transparency laws, aside from kind of the obvious things of doing the market research that we mentioned, what do you think employees and job seekers can do to ensure that they're being paid fairly?
Yeah, market research, number one. If you have a colleague in your department or on your team that is in a similar role or pretty close, have a conversation with them about how much you are both compensated. Always lead with transparency. When you introduce that conversation, you don't want to ask someone how much they make and not be transparent yourself. So be the first to offer it. I also recommend that having these conversations off company time and property, because some companies do have their rules in place that you cannot be talking about pay, even though it's your legal right. And that's another point, is make sure that you are protected under the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA. It protects most workers, but not public employees, consultants, farm workers, or railroad workers. So just double check, quick Google search of the NLRA to make sure you are protected and know your rights. That applies also to pay transparency laws. Check what laws are happening in your state. But after having conversations with your colleagues, you can take to the internet. There are so many resources to go through. I recommend going to at least 5 to 6 different sources, because all information is different, and that applies to having conversations directly with people. You don't want to base your market research off one person, because if they are underpaid, now you are also setting your baseline lower than it should be. So aim to talk to at least 2 to 3 different people. If you can't find someone in person, go to LinkedIn. We have a glossary at our fingertips of every single worker in the world. Find somebody that works in a similar role at a similar company in a similar industry and send them a message. You'd be surprised how many people, like I found with strangers on the street, are open to having these conversations, because we recognize the importance of it. And you never lose out on money by being transparent with somebody else. You can only help each other make more. Take advantage of all the resources on the internet, anonymous databases like ours, platforms like Indeed, Glassdoor. These are great places to reach out to, but do your research and always advocate for yourself.
Oh, thank you. I could not have said it better. You are helping start the conversation and changing, as you said, changing the conversation by sparking it amongst other people as well. Hannah, thank you so much for being here.
This was so much fun. I could go all day.
Same. Oh, I have so many things to say, but
awesome.
That's all for this episode. If you're a new listener, be sure to subscribe to The New Way We Work wherever you listen. And if you like this episode, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And we want to hear from you. Work is changing every day. What's the most pressing issue on your mind? Email us at podcast@fastcompany.com. The New Way We Work is produced by Julia Shu, Avery Miles, Blake Odom, and Joshua Christensen, with editing by Nicholas Torres.